Yeah, I just wanted to jump right into it. I wanted to start off today with a little bit of opening prep before we started getting into the games. We've got 5 full games today, which is great. And yeah, I just wanted to look at basically the Open Sicilian, see basically what what theory we could get from that in like the first 15 minutes of this lesson. So yeah. Open Sicilian is probably one of the most common openings in chess. There's tons and tons of stuff done, basically, a lot of material that's been written on it, a lot of different things that, can happen and can go wrong. But the main thing that, in terms of the Open Sicilian that I want to focus on is basically the main idea of the Sicilian is, there's asymmetry in the position. So it's an opening that has a lot of winning chances, and it's kind of a fighting opening for black. Probably black's winning chances out of the Sicilian are as high as any opening that I can think of against e4. It plays out pretty well. On the other hand, black will need to be able to withstand some pretty aggressive king side attacks. But if he does, and if he can make the counterplay about the queen side, he finds himself in a pretty good position. It's a really interesting opening. Open Sicilian can involve d6 or knight c6 or e6. But the defining characteristic of this Open Sicilian is d4 on white's third move. So if we're looking at this, knight c6, d4, pawn takes, and there's a few different options here. E5 is an aggressive one. But d4, pawn takes d4, knight takes d4 is basically what defines the Open Sicilian. So here, most common is knight f6. Alternatives include e6, g6, which is known as the dragon, e5, which is, I guess they're calling it the Lowenthal variation, but, this is an interesting opening. The knight generally goes to b5 here. And this ends up being a pretty interesting situation with white getting a lot of play on the queen side early, which eventually ends. But it basically allows early play by white on the queen side, and then some counterattacking by black. Here, d6, knight 1c3, knight f6, bishop g5, and basically here, it's a position where the d5 square is one that white wants to capture with his knight. Bishop e7 gets played. I'm surprised bishop e7 isn't the main line here, but it's a6, knight a3, b5, and basically black, in response to white's quick moves here, there's expansion on the queen side for black. Hey, thank you very much for joining the stream, Myriad. How's it going? So here, b5, knight d5, and there's a lot of pressure getting placed on this f6 pawn. No, it is. It's pretty interesting. This Open Sicilian this is just one line of many. Basically I got the request, which is a good request and awesome, to cover the Open Sicilian in a slot. So I wanted to start off today with the Open Sicilian. So ideas like e6, knight c3, queen c7, bishop b3, and basically white's going to be in a pretty good place here. I'm not familiar with the names. I guess this is, I knew Taimanov. This is a Taimanov Sicilian, but Bestrikov variation. Okay. This is an early queen c7. Hey, welcome, Tarash. Thank you very much for joining the stream. And thank you very much too, Julio. Thanks everyone for being here. This is overall pretty interesting. a6 heads off b5 early. Moves here like queen d2, knight f6, castles queenside. And overall, basically it's a position where white is, white basically has a spatial advantage in the center, but the main asymmetry of the position, which is this open c file, is going to lead to attacking for black on white's castled king. So back to, I'm good. Thank you very much for asking. So basically, this situation in general leads to asymmetry and potential attacks along the c-file for the rook. That's really the main characteristic of the Sicilian. In general, and I draw this from the Ideas Behind the Chess Openings by Fine, which is a book that I definitely recommend, definitely after tactical study, but it's a good book and gives a good sense of what to expect in openings. It's a little bit dated, but it's a very good book. In the Ideas Behind the Chess Openings, they basically explain that you know, games out of the Sicilian, and that generally means the open Sicilian, but pretty much all Sicilians, you know, involve a double-edged position where white is aggressively attacking out of the king side, and black is aggressively attacking on the queen side. This isn't actually a particular game. Someone suggested that we take a look at the open Sicilian, and yeah, I figured maybe just as an idea we could start the lessons off each day with a 15-minute slot on openings, and then we could jump into games. So basically, you know, one slot for opening theory, and then 5 slots for games is what I was thinking. At least for the next few days. I sort of wanted to try that out and see how it goes, but yeah. Here's the open Sicilian. Here, knight c3 is the main line, d6, bishop g5, e6, and basically these are all kind of Sicilian-type positions that it's good to kind of adjust your vision to. You know, basically the point of the Sicilian for white is to attack aggressively on the king side. The black king, because, you know, partially because of c5 opens the rook file, and partially because the c file becomes the natural square for the rook. You know, this Sicilian very rarely involves the king castling queen side. So basically, a pretty good pre-made attack for white is to attack aggressively on black's king side, and if that happens, it usually ends up pretty well. Knight f6, knight c3, d6, bishop g5, e6, and here, you know, basically pressure's getting mounted on the queen on d8. And white's pawn, you know, white's single pawn holds up pretty well against these non-advanced pawns by black in the center. It's pretty, yeah, it's generally a pretty good position. Queen d2, a6, castles queenside, bishop d7, and, you know, there's going to be some pressure on the d6 pawn. You know, this is a position that's a little bit unusual in open Sicilian because the king hasn't castled kingside yet. It's you know, the main attacking point here for white is d6, and this isn't really particularly vulnerable. You know, what white is hoping for here is pretty straightforward things like, say, bishop b. I mean, the main line here is f4, which could pair potentially with bishop to c4. But this is a line in which castling kingside is very delayed. Here, basically, you know, the kingside pawns get disrupted, and now there's not really a great way for black to counter on the kingside. Anyways, you know, black basically can't castle on the kingside. This g file is going to become a big liability. So I don't know, maybe castling queenside here, or maybe just playing king to e7 and developing the bishop to h3. But this is sort of an atypical Sicilian opening. Let's go back. I sort of want to look more at d6, which is another really popular line here. Pawn takes d5, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, d6. And here, yeah, you know, this is one of the positions where white has a better chance of playing bishop c4. Bishop c4 in the Sicilian is kind of an opening move that, you know, is a little bit less good than it is in the Italian game or the Ruy Lopez. This diagonal is not as strong if e5 hasn't yet been played. Black can pretty much shut down the bishop on c4 with e6. There's not much that white can do against this open c4 to f7 line. Anyways, that is pretty interesting. And here, but let's look at this earlier d6 because it plays out the same way with d4, knight takes d4. But I think this will lead to a more you know, more traditional castling heavy position. Here I'd say a6, bishop g5, e6. But here, you know, now castling becomes a much more appealing opportunity. Main line here is queen f3, queen c7, castles queenside, and castles kingside. So now, basically, one of the main, you know, this I think of as a much more traditional Sicilian game. In this game, you can play g4, h4, g5, and basically just attack aggressively as white, while black tries to play moves like b5 and, you know, things that will attack you on the queen side. This is what I think of as a very traditional kind of Sicilian game. You know, the king side, white is attacking on the king side, black is attacking on the queen side. White, you know, is aiming to do this as quickly as possible, and the longer the game goes on, the more likely that white will have to direct attention to attacks on the queen side, and the more of a problem this queen side's going to be. You know, this queen attacking on indirectly on c2 is definitely something white needs to worry about. Moves like b5, b4, pushing away the knight on c3. And overall, you know, this sort of thematically follows from a lot of the Sicilian games. B5, e5 is a little bit weird here. I prefer g4, bishop b7, queen h3, and you can just see, you know, basically this is you know, I wouldn't focus much on the particular line or particular move order, but the thematic concepts of this are really what I'm expecting the Open Sicilian. You know, white is launching an attack on h7 and on the king side in general, and black is launching an attack on c2 and on the queen side in general. These pawns are expanding, and these pawns are expanding for white. Queen h3 is a little bit weird because, you know, it blocks off the h4 push, which is frequently a thought. But I think that just in general, this is the type of position that, you know, you have to, you know, think about as a broad, you know, a broad demonstration of the Sicilian opening. You know, it's good for white, but both sides have chances. Very you know, double-edged attacking games for both white and black here. So yeah, so you know, don't memorize the move order, but I just think this is good for getting like a feel of what this opening tends to look like. Attacking for white on the king side, attacking for black on the queen side. You know, white can castle either king side or queen side in the Sicilian, but because of c5 and the open bishop's file, black almost exclusively castles king side. So yeah, so you know, these are very broad thematic concepts. I'll just go through the main line here. Knight takes d4. You know, a lot. I'm intentionally going through this quickly. Just it's not about the move order. It's more about the concepts of the opening. But here's another position. This one's a little bit more conservative, where you know, basically white you know, white is going to be launching an attack on the king side. I'm not a huge fan of e5 here. I think e5 is probably an early, you know, basically an early neutralization of the white center pawns. But you know, it's really about establishing attacks on the king side here. G4, H4, H5, G5, and pressure placed on H7 and G7. That's white's goal. In this particular line, you know, there's a trade on C6. Knight takes knight, pawn takes knight. But the principles are basically the same. The rook is going to, you know, hold on to this open file, and pressure is going to be placed on b2. That's, you know, that is more or less the same plan. You know, this will have the same kind of pawn expansion for black. You know, exploitation of open files on the queen side and attack on the queen side castled white king. Don't memorize, you know, I would just say don't memorize the move order. This is what you're looking for as white, and this is what you're looking for as black. I just wanted to play big general openings where the concepts in the Sicilian Open are demonstrated. So here, e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, knight takes, knight f6, knight c3, d6. And yeah, this is just main line. You know, there's other main lines that are going to be sort of similar, but you know, they're basically all going to transpose like this. In many ways, I sort of this is a rare line in which black castles queenside. This is a little bit unusual. I don't want to spend much time on this, but it's going to involve expanding on the queen side. But we'll just show you, you know, basically my main goal in doing this is, since I know that I can't cover every line in depth, I really just want to show, you know, what does an open Sicilian look like, and I'll play through maybe 2 or 3 more of them, but I'll show you kind of what the positions generally tend to look like. I'm literally just picking the top ones here, but you can see, okay, so this is just another completely random mainline open Sicilian. It involves the same concepts: attacks on h7. For white, and then in this one's a little bit more center heavy, but queenside heavy moves for black, b5 and b4. But this is what a Sicilian looks like: bishop placed on h7, moves like, you know, g4, g5. In this particular variation, you know, white's going to have to be a little bit more careful having castled kingside. But the pieces for white are oriented towards the black kingside, and that's really the takeaway that I'd like to give for these types of open Sicilians. I'm just gonna keep picking lines, and I'm gonna show you they're all gonna sort of look like that. There's gonna be a lot of variation, but at the end of the day, they're gonna all involve basically black castling queenside and or castling kingside, and the pieces oriented towards there. Here's another completely random one. But the king is castled kingside, and it offers a natural opportunity for white to go through and advance here. So really, at the end of the day, I think it's much more important to understand the concepts behind the Sicilian. Plans for white and for black behind the Sicilian, than to spend time focused on any particular move order. At Grandmaster level, you can spend time people do spend time on 40 move novelties and huge lines of memorized theory. But at club level, I think the main just understanding of the concepts here, I think are the best idea. This is basically what a Sicilian position looks like. Get this kind of general position kind of noted in your mind, and I think that will help you out a lot in kinds of in Sicilian type games. I'll play one more, but I'll show you. It's going to look exactly the same. There will be different specifics to the position, but the overarching plan of the opening, which is, in my opinion, the most important thing, is going to be the same. C4 is a little strange. This is the Maroczy bind, also probably an important thing to address in the open Sicilian. This gives good control over D5. These games are a little less attack heavy for white, a little less kingside attacking than normal, but often still a kingside attack. I'm really just going randomly to the first ones here, but I'll show you. It's going to turn out to be basically the same thing. Yeah. So here we're basically in the same position. My hope is that you can kind of adjust your pattern recognition to see this is what a black Sicilian sort of looks like. It's not about the move order; it's about the underlying concepts of the attack. It's really easy to learn the move. You can learn the move orders, but they're not that helpful if it's just memorization. What I think is much more valuable is to understand what the underlying concepts are. And this is black castling kingside and white launching an attack in the open Sicilian. But you can see the pieces are oriented towards there. In the particular C4 openings, these tend to be a little less kingside attack heavy, a little bit more movement on the queen side. But in general, the main principles: white orienting the pieces for an attack on the king side, and black trying to capitalize on these queenside pawns. This queenside pawn minority and this open file, those hold true in every Sicilian opening that we've basically looked at. And I was honestly just choosing randomly. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely thank you very much for the follow, KHM. I appreciate you following, and thank you very much for joining the stream. The Maroczy bind is considered good. Yeah, it definitely is considered good. I mean, basically, the value of the Maroczy bind is it gives white better center control in an efficient way. So here, C4 and basically this D5 pawn is held with only really one extra move for white. By moving C2 to C4, the D5 pawn, white has much better control over the D5 pawn, or the D5 square. D5 is a much less comfortable move for black to play here. So it's basically getting the D5. The D5 square at the cost of one tempo. If you, in general, if this, if in general, D5 tends to be a good expanding move for black and Sicilian. So being able to stop that at the cost of one tempo is often a good trade. On the other hand, white is trying to launch an attack on the black king side as quickly as possible. But yeah, basically, it's often a good trade to give up that one tempo to get better control over D5. Afterwards, I think you should probably try to make an effort to start moving things towards kingside attack. But the move C4 is often a good idea. This tempo is often a good trade for better control of the D5 pawn. It's situationally specific, but it's a trade that often makes sense for white. That time for that control over that square. So that would be my demonstration. That would be my concept on this. But the main ideas still hold. Even in Maroczy bind type positions, white should still be attacking aggressively on the king side. That's very, very rarely going to be the wrong strategy. Almost always correct. To just allocate resources over there. Anyways, I hope that's helpful. There are many books written by grandmasters on the Open Sicilian. but I hope this is kind of a good demonstration of the overarching strategies. You know, I think everyone should study tactics way before they get into this, but the ideas behind the chess openings by Fine is a super good book. It gives basically good attacking plans and good overviews of pawn structures in every opening. You know, it probably only spends 10-15 pages on the Sicilian Open, but in those 10-15 pages, you know, the concepts behind it are stated very clearly and succinctly. So that's a book that I really like. It's an old one. Parts of it are probably a little bit dated with modern theory, but you know, for club level, I think it's awesome. You know, it'll really tell you what's going on in every specific opening. So that's why I like that one. That's why I recommend it. Yeah, no, I hope it's helpful. You know, if that's something that, you know, for me, you know, learning chess was always really about efficiency. You know, how do you get to master while spending as little time as possible on chess, you know, when you're doing work and school and other obligations. So, you know, I think the ideas behind the chess openings is a book that has great explanations, kind of similar to this one, much better than that one, I'm sure. But ideas behind the chess openings will tell you what's going on in every specific chess opening, without getting too you know, without getting too deep on the concept of theory memorization, which I think, you know, is useful at some extremely high level, but does not, you know, theory memorization really, you know, I think is of much more limited value than concept understanding at club level. You know, it's cool to show that you memorize the theory, but understanding the concepts, I think, is a way that you will get much better return on your time. And that's, you know, that's what's the most important, provided that I don't think any of us are going to be, you know, I don't think any of us should plan on being professional chess players in the future. You know, none of us are headed for super GM level. We're not pros. We're playing the game and we're trying to improve. So I think that that ideas behind the chess openings by Fine will give very good return on your time. But yeah, thank you. Explanations like that, ideas behind the chess openings by Fine Random, and please, yeah, no, if you have a minute, it's a great book. Thank you very much, MF. Thank you for the follow. I really appreciate it. Yeah. Hey, Electric Horse, how's it going? But yeah, so now I wanted to get into the game. So, Electric Horse, your game is next, and we'll get right into it. Your games just happened to be second today, so I wanted to get into this. Cool. Awesome. So you were playing this game as black against an IM. Yeah, no problem. Thank you for being here, Raymond. Yeah, so here, let's load this game. You were playing black against an IM, and so a very strong opponent. So let's see sort of what happened here. I just want to play through it quickly. It's an IM, so you know, that's very tough, tough strategy, tough person to play. But yeah, interesting. Okay, so it basically looks like White got these pawns very extended in the center. Those really extended pawns. I'll just pause for a second and then I'll go back to the beginning. This type of advanced pawn structure. This happens a lot in the I guess I would say Grunfeld. The Grunfeld basically involves this as a common tactic. You know, there's often good opportunities for black to basically exploit this, or sorry, for white to basically exploit this this pass pawn on the d file, this very advanced pawn. And this is a situation of this occurring out of you know, the semi-Slav, I guess, or maybe even the Orthodox Queen's Gambit declined. But yeah, this pawn structure, advanced pawns in the center, happens in a good number of Grunfeld games, and can be a good attacking resource for white. Let's see. All right, I'll slow this down. Let's look at the opening theory here. Okay, knight c6 is knight c6, I guess, is forced here. Because knight c6 is forced, I would lean towards c6 over bishop to b4. Bishop to b4 also appears to be fine. You know, they look like the number 1 and 2 options here. But I actually I play c6 here. I'm a fan of this semi-Slav structure. I am liking kind of the, I basically think that this is a very solid pawn structure for black in most Queen's Gambit decline situations. And here, I think this is, this tends to be good for black. Here, e3, knight d7, queen c2, bishop d6, bishop d3. And I think mainly, black is in a pretty solid position. If you look at the eval here, it's about equal. I sort of rushed through this, but I think, there are many situations in which black can secure early equality using this structure. It's just very not vulnerable. Pawn can take on d5, e-pawn takes on d5, freeing the bishop on this diagonal. It's just solid. So for that reason, I guess I would say semi-Slav with e6 and c6 can be a good choice out of the Queen's Gambit declined. I think it's a really it's an interesting opening, but this structure I think is a solid one. I would steer people towards assembling this way. There's many fewer ways to get sort of hung up as black here. It's basically flexible. On the take of d5, you take with e6, and it's difficult for black to really trap you here. In situations like bishop to b4, knight to c6, a misstep here, a tactical misstep here could really be a problem. Good question. Good question, Electric Horse. So the most ideal way in which you get the white squared bishop out is through pawn takes d5, pawn takes d5. If that ever happens, that's great for white, because then white gets this free diagonal. Otherwise, it is sort of a liability. Often the white squared bishop doesn't get out until relatively late in the game. Basically, as black here, you end up playing for a c5. Basically, this structure holds in the early opening. Then you castle, and you basically make it so that your safety is good and that all your other pieces are developed. And then you push for something like c5. And then through that hole made by either c5 or e5 push, that's how you get the bishop out. But the delay of the white squared bishop, is definitely true here. The light squared bishop does develop late in this opening, but it will be through a hole in either c6 or e6, and that hole will either come through an exchange on d5 or a push of c5 or e5. And either way, those things are going to be very helpful. Interesting question. That is a case where taking with the e-pawn is better. It's because this diagonal tends to be better for the black bishop. But I do agree. I do agree with that. Yes, that is true too as well. Random. Really good question, Electric Horse. Thank you for asking it. But this is a case in which you actually take back with the e-pawn. The e-pawn opens up this long diagonal for the bishop. That diagonal is stronger than the fianchetto diagonal, given how closed this position is. So basically, this diagonal is the correct one, and this diagonal is not the correct one in this Queen's Gambit declined opening. Random also makes a really good point. There's also an issue that comes up. So c6, pawn takes d5, pawn takes c6. This gives white counterplay. It opens up the c file for the rook, so c1 facing c8, and also gives the white knight the potential to play knight b5. And if you mix those two together, the rook on c1 with the knight on b5, that provides a lot of counterplay. So that's a tactical and not fundamental reason why e takes is better. But e takes is better, in these types of Queen's Gambit declined openings. It's a really good question because, this is one of those cases where the fundamentals taking towards the center are not as true. So I'm really glad you asked that one, Electric, because I think it's important. C takes opens up this file and allows knight to b5. So white gets counterplay. That is a big part of the correct answer. Also this diagonal is a better one for the bishop. But yeah, really good question, and definitely something to think about in this opening. Anyways, I prefer the semi-Slav structure to something like this. This gets really tricky. Knight can do something like play knight d5 is not the correct move here, but like in general, concepts like knight d5 put a lot of pressure on knight c6. The bishop probably ends up having to take on c3, and the bishop to d7. And actually, with full bishop takes c3, bishop d7, knight takes d7, you basically have two knights to white's two bishops, and that becomes a problem if white can successfully open the position. Yeah, interesting. So anyways, I advocate for this structure. This has been a pretty successful, response to d4 openings for me. This is just solid. And in this structure, one of the non-intuitive things is that you do take back on d5 if white takes with d5, or white takes d5 with c4. That is a really good point. But yeah, it's too easy to get caught kind of off balance with these pieces out like this. The development looks good, but there are tactical reasons why this can be problematic. It's not bad, but you just need to be very careful as black. C6 allows you much more latitude for, much more margin for error and much more opportunity to play positional chess without anything really, game-endingly bad happening. So anyways, let's go back to the game. Castles, or sorry, here e3 was played. Yeah, c5 is definitely a move. In fact, I'm a little bit reluctant to show because I think that it's there's some things that are anti-fundamental about it. But I'm actually looking at d4. Hey, thank you very much for the follows, Raymond and AK. Thank you very much for following and for joining the stream. So here basically c4 gets responded to by c5. This is actually an opening that I'm entertaining playing right now. It's not. I probably shouldn't be showing this because I think it's sort of goes counter to some of the some of the principles of this opening. But I'm actually trying this out. One of the big benefits of this game is it turns d4 into it turns a closed d4 opening into an open position. I'll show you how open this situation gets. E6, c takes d5, e takes, and then basically, this is less open than it can potentially get. But basically, it makes the d4 openings, which can often be very closed and maneuvering and non-tactical, into a much more tactically oriented position. Let's say d takes c4, e3, e6. And here, especially after an exchange on d4, this can really get dangerous. Anyways, yeah, and basically pressure on d4, and a general opening of the deep position against d4, which can be a really good play. But yes, c5 can definitely be held. Sorry to get distracted with that. C4 can definitely, or c5 can definitely be playable as a resource for black. So even say in this position where you've played into this semi-Slav structure, a good break at various points. Generally after you've castled, and generally after you've played like bishop e7, castles, knight d7, you can break with c5 here, and turn it into a much more open position. That break, it's situationally dependent whether or not that's a good idea or not, but it is definitely a break that can be played. C5 or E5 are basically the only ways that this white squared bishop are going to get out. So depending on the situation, you will come up with either an E5 or C5 break to get the dark squared bishop out. And it's usually C5, but C5, or it's usually E5, but C5 can happen too. They both happen. But black will need one of these breaks in this semi-Slav structure to get the light squared bishop out. Anyways. Let's go back to the game. Bishop takes, okay. Here in terms of eval, white's got an edge. Trading this good squared bishop for this knight on c3, might tactically be the best, but I don't think that it's that solid an idea. It's basically you're parting with the bishop pair much earlier than you'd want to. In the queenside games, you can basically delay these types of trades until a very late point in the game. So here this leads you in kind of a not so awesome direction. Bishop takes c3, pawn takes c3, and then this b1 rook can start attacking on the queen side, and yeah. A3, B4, C5 definitely happens. You know, that's a you know, that can happen from Queen's Gambit accepted. Well, or a similar structure can happen on the black side for Queen's Gambit accepted. But yeah, you know, these queenside advances, it's definitely something to consider, but I don't think I would make it the biggest focus. Like, you know, mainly your goal here is to get castled on the king side, and there the queenside advances aren't necessarily extremely important. You can play like rook e8, e5, knight d5, knight e5, and that sort of offers you a plan as black. But yeah, you know, it's good to stay on top of those moves. But if you're castled kingside, there's not really much. You know, they're not really as dangerous as they appear. The queenside expansion is a way that white can gain space. But with the castled kingside, you don't really have to worry about losing to those moves, and then ultimately you can undermine them with a5. But yeah, really interesting question too, Electric Horse, for sure. So yeah, so basically here, I think I don't know about this trade. This trade seems proactively, you know, it seems to get rid of the D pawn for a C pawn that can be replaced by C4. So you're basically trading. So in terms of things to think about, this bishop trade, I think it's too early for it. You know, this knight is not really threatening you. There's nothing really that makes knight b5, which is a playable move for it, super dangerous. You know, you're holding the d5 pawn fine. You know, something like bishop to e7 could be an idea. And I don't know. I think a more strategically solid idea. Bishop takes c3 gives up your bishop pair and rook b1. Yeah, no, that's true. I agree with that. Well, this is the game to be. Yeah, no. Oh wait, no. Sorry, you're right. This is not the game. So let's go through this. So white here, I think, basically makes a question. You know, I think this trade is not ideal. You're parting with your good squared bishop for this knight, and this knight wasn't doing enough to justify that that trade at this point. So I think that not doing that is probably this I think is a strategic. You know, this is not the best idea strategically. Something like bishop to d7 looks pretty good for black here. This puts more pressure on the queen, and it develops the bishop a little. Especially since c6 isn't blocking this diagonal. Now it's probably best to move the bishop to d7 and get the bishop out. But it's, you know, this is what I would recommend, bishop to d7 here. Bishop takes c3 is just, it's not a great, these two pawns are not, these two pieces are not super good ones for black to be trading. And it also opens up this this b file for the rook. So I think basically bishop to d7 would be playable here. You do play it, but you play it after the trade. So now here, I do think, yeah, pawn takes c4. I think pawn takes c4, waiting for bishop to d3, is a good general tactic. You know, it basically you know, makes the bishop have wasted a move doing that. But yeah, generally here, I think pawn takes c4 is fine here. You know, I don't know how good this relative trade is, the c4 versus d5. But you know, it does sort of waste the tempo for white, so it's not a bad idea to play it. And now, you know, really I would focus on developing pieces. Knight a5 is probably fine, but I prefer like knight e7, knight g6, and then start to try to you know, potentially attack on the king side. Black has kind of a flexibility in plans here. You know, black could start trying to advance on the queen side, but probably a better, I mean, you know, basically black has flexible plans. Either a queen side attack or a king side attack looks actually surprisingly fine here. Knight a7, engine advocates bishop a3, but I'm not, that's sort of unusual. Say knight e5, knight g6, and I think probably the best idea is to start attacking, you know, basically trade off this knight if you can. And disrupt white's pawn structure, but I think black can still play for a kingside attack here. It's a little trickier than in some situations, and white has the benefit of his good squared bishop while you have your bad squared bishop for the attack. But I think that might be a reasonable plan. You know, there's also expansions that black could do with like c6, b5, a5, b4. But, you know, with queenside attacks, they're just not as, you know, if the king is castled kingside, a queenside attack just isn't really that pressing. It's basically, you know, you might be able to gain a queenside advantage, but you aren't going to be able to win with it until very late in the game. Not saying that's bad, but it's just a much less direct way to apply pressure to white. Here, you know, we're in an interesting position. But let's go back to the game. D takes c4, knight a5. Okay. Yeah, knight a5 is not bad. Definitely this threat is good. But I feel like bishop can just play to d3, and then this knight, you know, it's almost like in the Ruy Lopez where the knight plays a5 and then unmoves a5 with c6, and it's got specific benefits in the Ruy Lopez because in the Ruy Lopez you use that opportunity, that knight move to a5 to advance c5. That might actually be a playable tactic here, to be completely honest. So actually that I sort of like that plan, to be honest now. So in this situation where you've forced bishop to d3, I actually would be very tempted to play rook c8 and then c5. White may prevent it with bishop to a3 here, in which case you'd play rook to e8. But overall, I think moving the rook to c8 and then playing c5 could offer you some very good opportunities as black. That's an interesting structure, because with the c5 push, if this line gets opened, then you can focus a threat of the rook on c8 along the c file, and start attacking the queen and attacking this isolated c3 pawn. I think basically that's pretty valuable. So that actually is, looking at this position, so if I were to look at this position, what are the things going on? This rook could potentially come to the b file, but black can stop that threat pretty quickly with b6. White is attacking on the king side with these two pieces and the ability to get the knight in there as well. But I think black can tactically respond to that, you know, either with h6 or g6. So I don't think that's a huge issue. White hasn't castled. You know, there are plans here for white where white could start playing like h4, g4. Oh yeah, no worries, Raymond. Yeah, that 10-minute delay is helpful though. To be completely honest, you know, before we put on the 10-minute delay, we were getting all sorts of spammers and weird stuff, and people just sort of joining the stream. So 10 minutes, 10 minutes, I think is helpful at the end of the day. But yeah, I agree that is sort of annoying, Raymond. But thank you very much for refollowing. Anyways, yeah, so there are white plans here where g4, h4, and movements along the g and h files are pretty good for white. But yeah, this is interesting. So there's a non-castling plan for white, but especially if white decides to castle kingside here, you know, these attacks for white are not going to be super strong. On the black side, in terms of establishing plans, I actually, you know, the more I look at it, the more I like it. I think rook to c8 and then c5, and you just have this, and if you can open the file, you'll have great pressure from this rook on c8, and c3 is offered as a good target for attack for that rook on c8. So that's the plan that I would assemble as black here. Be careful about attacks on the king side from white, but after castling king side, I don't think they're that bad. And then in terms of a middle game plan, I'd play rook c8 and c5. h6 is a defensive move. a6. Yeah, interesting. So here, yeah, I mean, the plan that I would assemble here is black. I see you're trying to get play started on the queen side. But I think the more efficient improvement here is rook to c8 and c5. I think you want to do less with the minor pieces in this particular case, and more with this heavy piece, this rook c8. The pressure along c8 onto the c file. That's what I would propose as the way to execute this plan. It's the right plan, I think. I think, you know, if you can start basically chipping away at this and potentially getting both of white's pawns to be isolated, then you are going to have some good queenside play. I think that offers black the best plan here. So h6, e4, and this I think is yes. So I think the minor pieces were just not really the correct way to go. In terms of breaking the equality for in this game, white's already a bit ahead, but I think it's fine. I think this tactic was not the right. I mean, the strategy getting play on the queen side as a broad idea is good, but I don't. And I get the want to trade the bishop for the bad squared bishop for the good squared bishop too. I think that makes sense from a conceptual perspective. But in terms of tactical execution, c4 just shuts down everything so successfully that I think bishop to b5 was not the correct tactical idea there. Anyways, c5, and now yeah, and then those pawns really get advanced. So yeah, you're playing someone extremely strong. This was an IM playing white. So you really have, you have someone who's making very few errors tactically or strategically. But IMs are beatable. IMs lose to A players for sure. I've seen it happen many times. But yeah, I think the better plan here was to get the rook onto the c file and then open the c file with c5, and then exert pressure on the white pawns. The b5 pawn just runs into too many resources from white. There's a little bit of a vulnerability in kind of the way that the pieces are oriented on the c5 rook push. Yeah, but the correct general concept attacking on the queen side. I think you make a good determination that basically the king side is safe and it's time for black to start to try to get some play on the queen side. But just tactically speaking, the rook on c8 and the c5 move I think were a better way to go. And then this got really dangerous. So here, not really even anything. To be honest, it's not really like you made such an enormous misstep. White's just an IM and is really good here. But white was basically able to get those connected pass pawns, which are going to win a piece or better. So kind of a bummer there. But overall, very solid. I thought you actually played this game pretty well as black. And, the errors I would point to, bishop takes c3, I'm not a fan of. To be fair, this opening I know is probably playable, but I'm not a huge fan of, to be honest. I think c6 knight c6 structures in Queen's Gambit are kind of risky. I wouldn't go for that. I would go for either the semi-Slav or a straightforward developing move like bishop b7. It's not particularly committal. But knight c6 blocks in the c7 pawn, and that c7 pawn can often provide a good defensive resource for black. So for that reason, I'd sort of steer you away from playing knight c6 against the Queen's Gambit declined. Here, bishop takes c3 I think was a not a great trade for black. It makes some sense, but giving up your bishop pair and your good squared bishop early for that knight is, I think, not ideal. And then you still get a reasonably good position. I think from here, where you've got basically, hey, thank you very much for the follow, Jaff. Thank you for joining the stream. Yeah, so even here, where white does have a slight edge, I think developing queenside counterplay is the right idea. I think you really did have the right idea here. The king side is not really that vulnerable. I think you've made a good assessment there, and it's really about coming up with this queenside structure advancement as quickly as possible. So with rook c8 and c5, I think that's the way to do this. But your overarching idea I think was a good one, which is now that the king side is safe and you're not getting attacked and everything's fine. You start pushing on the queen side for play. Rook c8, c5 I think was the better tactical idea. A6, bishop to b5 got shut down by c4 too quickly. So I think that overall was not the right general strategy. Rook c8, c5 was the play. So overall they're very interesting. And then of course the guy you're playing is fantastic. So he got this. He basically exploited this. Yeah, White is an IM and is very strong. White made very few, if any, real errors in this game. I'm trying to come up with plans, but White is an IM, so really high level. This was just a great, this was just a great way for White to play this. This connected passed pawn is killer. Really good tactic, exactly. So this, from this point, I think White's pretty much won. But a very good player, to be honest. Really strong. It's cool that you got to play such a good player. Those are 3 points I think that might offer some place for reflection. I like the semi-Slav more than I like any of the lines, any of the Queen's Gambit declined lines with Knight C6. That's probably personal taste. But overall, not a bad game, and I think you had some very good concepts here, Electric Horse. Just a little bit of a need for tactical execution to determine that Rook C8 and C5 were the correct ways to generate play on the Queen side. But overall, very solid. It's a good game, and thank you very much for sending it to me. Please keep sending them. I hope this is helpful, and it's actually really interesting to me to kind of figure out where a good opportunity to attack a to attack an IM is. Yeah, there's definitely some truth to that, Tarash. If you're playing Magnus Carlsen, you're playing from behind the whole game based on a lack of based on an unequal playing strength. But yeah, no, there's a lot of truth to that. But on the other hand, IMs are beatable. You can definitely snag wins against IMs in Blitz and Bullet. And occasionally in over-the-board rated games. They make errors. Grandmasters make errors. Magnus Carlsen, not so sure, but very high-level players make errors from time to time. And if you're in the right place at the right time and you've done the right preparation, you can definitely snag them sometimes. All right, on to the next game. Okay. So this game was sent by Santos Wani, who's playing black here. We'll take it from his perspective. He's playing the modern. D5 here would be the Grunfeld, or I guess I would think of this as the Grunfeld, but I guess that requires the knight to be on C3. Still looks like the Grunfeld to me. I would call that the Grunfeld. Bishop G7, knight C3, and here is where you would transpose it into the Grunfeld. D5 here. Yeah, yes, Pravila, that is true. I've never lost to him either, to be honest. But I'm pretty sure that I would. Yeah, so C takes D5, knight takes D5, E4, knight takes C3, pawn takes C3, C5. Transposes this opening into the Grunfeld. King's Indian defense, they're still calling this the King's Indian defense, but looks like a Grunfeld to me, so I don't know. Anyways. Let's see. So D6. D6 is basically the choice to make this a King's Indian defense, more closed flank opening relative to a Grunfeld. The most popular line is to transpose this into the Grunfeld, and castling is number 2, and then D6 is number 3. Just saying, I would play D5 here. It's the most challenging move for White, but D6 is fine too. You just have to have a preference for flank openings as opposed to more aggressive responses to D4. And flank openings are fine. Grandmasters play them. So here, the modern response is E4. This really does make it like a flank versus center opening. Black will have a spatial disadvantage. White will have a spatial advantage, and Black will look for a position to undermine. But instead, a less commonly played move is played here, E3. So, castles, bishop E2, knight D7, and we're basically in a very standard, maybe less aggressive than normal with the pawn on E3 versus E4, but a very standard, modern, closed opening against an opening where White has taken control of the center and has a spatial advantage. Looking at this position, I'm sure that the eval is positive for White. But that's not unusual. Eval goes in white's direction against most modern type openings. In the modern type opening, the theory is give white a spatial advantage and a center advantage, and all the advantages that go along with those two things, and then hope that he overextends. This can work quite well for grandmasters who are playing against players who, are likely to make real positional errors. But it is giving your opponent a really good, it's giving your opponent advantages for free. Your hope is that he misuses those advantages, but a key part of this game is coming up with the right pawn break and accepting the advantages that you're giving your opponent, and hoping that your opponent will overextend. That's a tough way to play in my mind. I mean, in my mind, I don't want to give my opponent any advantages, but it can work quite well against opponents who are error prone, and that's what I think makes it appealing. Okay. So bishop d2, knight d7, bishop d3, e5. E5 is good. E5 is the break that black must play at some point in in the modern. You can do it with c5 too, but I think e5 is even better. Either on pawn takes, pawn takes. No problem, random. Thank you very much for joining the stream. So e5, pawn takes e5, knight takes e5, and then pawn takes e5. And white will actually or black will actually have pretty good center control. This was a good move. Played as the break of the modern opening. In the modern, black needs to play a pawn break at some point, usually either e5 or c5, and this is that in this case. Cool. Awesome. Castles, rook e8, h3, and now this is a big error. Black has basically made a good pawn move, good pawn break, and is making straightforward developing moves, which is correct. I think black's playing pretty well. Rook e8 and then h3, which is a big error. I hope black plays e4 here, because that looks like it wins. E4, knight takes, rook takes, and black is up by 4 points. Awesome. Really good, good play for black. Nice. Okay, cool. So it's a very short game, which, is great. It reflects good play by black. In terms of improving this position, I think you really actually, this is one of the situations where I think the modern actually really worked out great. You accepted this, this closed position, relatively unchallenging to white center. In fact, white center basically isn't getting attacked at all here, just built up solidly and offering a space advantage. E5 was a great break, really the right move here. It needs to be done in modern at some point. It depends. Yes, so King's Indian defense often involves, threats along the F file. One of the common things one of the common tactics in King's Indian defense is knight to e8, f5, and then expansion along the king side. Sometimes with moving the knight on e8 back to f6, behind the pawn structure. That's a common thing in the King's Indian defense. We looked at it in a Nakamura game. Yes, theoretically speaking, random, I think that is a very common way to play the King's Indian defense. Basically, it offers a pre-made attack for black along into the white king side. So rook e8, I guess, is sort of an anti-thematic move here. That said, I think that this position is going to turn in, this position has the potential to turn into something that's not as clearly recognizable as the King's Indian attack. Say, like, after pawn takes e5 here, knight takes e5 here, pawn takes, this to me does not really look like a King's Indian defense type position. This looks, I don't know what this looks like exactly. I guess this is sort of, has some characteristics of the Scandinavian at this point. But some characteristics. White still has the e-pawn. I don't know what opening you would call this exactly. Some d4 opening, but this is not clearly identifiable as the King's Indian defense to me anymore. So I think based on this idea that we're kind of moving away from the theoretical King's Indian defense, rook e8 is fine. An alternative that is thematically consistent with the rook's Indian defense is something like knight e8, f5, e4 getting threatened. But I think with this early e5 pawn break, which I think is the correct one, we're sort of moving away from King's Indian defense type strategy, and we'll wind up in a situation in which having the rook on an immediately open file is a good play. It's really a decision-making point for black. Knight e8 if he wants to basically continue the thematic King's Indian defense structures, and then rook e8 if he wants to opt for a more kind of more general d4 d5 type structure. It's interesting, or I guess maybe it would be called a modern. But the thematic King's Indian defense move would be knight e8 f5. Rook e8, it makes sense, without consideration of the opening that it's being played out of. I think rook e8 is a good move ultimately, even though it's anti-thematic. I think supporting this pawn is good, and I think putting the rook on an open file is good, or semi-open file. But yeah, it is anti. You make a good point, Random. It is an anti-thematic King's Indian defense move. It's not a King's Indian defense move. H3 is a big error. E4 is a perfect tactic. Great. And then basically black gets this early win. So great, strong play. Yeah, let's go back to the beginning. But I don't really think black made any errors. I thought E5 was a great push. Rook e8 was evaluated by the engine as the best move, even though it's an anti-thematic King's Indian defense move. And then there's a piece-winning tactic on move 9. So, I can't really think of any errors that black made here. It just looks like a well-executed pawn break and then an error and winning tactic against, out of a King's Indian defense d4 type game. Let's just look at the analysis. This is one of those ones where I bet black's going to have like an almost 100% eval. I just sort of want to look at it. Yeah, look, see, this is actually a really interesting situation, because this is actually like a 700 with like a 99% accuracy, and there just was no opportunity for black to make any errors here. He plays the modern in book to move 7, then basically plays 3 correct moves in a row, and at the end of those 3 correct moves, he gets a piece-winning win. So not really much opportunity for improvement for black. Just book play going into 3 correct moves, and you're up a piece. It's awesome when that happens. So yeah, overall very interesting. Thank you for sending it, and yeah, really appreciate it. Thank you very much for the game, Sanchajwani. No errors, which is awesome, and the game over by move 9. So good work. Got to look a little bit at the value of the anti-thematic rook e8 against out of the King's Indian defense here. But good playing, very strong, and yeah, please keep sending games. This was an interesting one. All right, on to the next game. Okay. I think this is Tarash's game, right? I think Tarash, this is your game, so I'm really excited to get to look at it. Tarash has sent a bunch of games that have really cool opening lines in them. I've learned some really cool opening theory from Tarash actually doing this stream. This is yeah, so this is the Sicilian, and I was holding on to this, and Tarash has sent some excellent and very instructive Sicilian games. Interesting. I'm not seeing queen d2, but I am seeing a really early knight d2. Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, so I don't know King's Indian attack super well. At various points I've thought about it as a response to the Sicilian, but I'm not super strong in this theory. So, I think we should be able to take a look at this, and I'm sure I'll learn something from studying this theory, and hopefully it'll be overall helpful. Okay, so like we were looking at the start of this lecture, d4, pawn takes d4, knight takes d4, transposes into the open Sicilian. Knight c3 keeps the Sicilian closed. This is interesting. Here, e5 is not the most common move. E5 will give black a big center and a control over the d4 square, but relatively weak control over the d5 square. Interesting. Yeah, interesting. I didn't know that, Tarash, but yeah, we're gonna see this in this game, so that is really interesting. Um, yeah, after e5, you can transpose into the King's Indian attack. Cool. G6, G3, Bishop G7, Bishop G2, and then basically you're back into some interesting Sicilian theory. Let's take a second and look at this opening situation, because this is actually pretty interesting. I'm just thinking about this. Black has perfect control over d4, and white has e5 is a theoretical move, but not one of the most popular theoretical moves. E5 comes on this move, so basically E5 is probably something like a 2% or 3% move. So whether or not that's theoretical or not is sort of it's a definition thing, but it's the fifth most popular move in this situation, where white sees d6 and keeps the Sicilian closed. E5 is interesting here. I think other moves, the more popular moves are knight c6, which makes sense, knight f6, which makes sense, or e6. Really very traditional Sicilian things. So here, I'm thinking, so it's definitely down there in terms of theory. Whether you call this theory, it's got 100 games on it, but e5, cool. Big center. Now one of the things that you really can do, and this is unusual in the Sicilian, is bishop to c4 actually becomes a hey, thank you very much, SW. Thank you very much for following and for joining the stream. So yeah, so now with e5 played, bishop c4 is actually the most common line. King's Indian attack is also a fine way to play it, but I just wanted to focus on the fact that with e5 played out of the Sicilian, bishop c4 has actually gone from a generally weak move in the Sicilian to a generally strong move in the Sicilian. The threat on f7 is very alive here. Without e5, and without the ability to play pawn to e6, the threat of c4 on f7 is often pretty weak. But here, with e5 having been played, the pressure placed on black's f7 and by the bishop on c4 is actually really a legitimate threat. So this would be a Sicilian in which you can play bishop c4. Basically, your assessment should be whether or not e5 has been played. So here, d3 transposes into the King's Indian attack. Makes sense. G6, G3, knight, bishop G7, bishop G2, knight E7, and then cool, interesting. So yeah, so this is a move that I'm not familiar with. I don't know if this theory line is from Magnus Carlsen, but that's a really cool theme that Tarash is bringing up. Repositioning the knight on f3, which is blocking the f4 push, into to knight c4. One of the big weaknesses in the closed Sicilian is that you basically can't play knight f3 or that knight f3 causes problems. A natural move to play in the closed Sicilian is f4, which is the Grand Prix attack if played on the third move. If you play knight f3 before you play f4, the f2 pawn gets kind of stuck and can't really contribute at all to the center position. So, moving the knight from f3 makes sense from a thematic perspective because you want to get the f2 pawn to f4 and then play f4 and basically threaten the center and potentially threaten the king side if the black king is castled already. So getting, basically knight f3 is an efficient idea for white, but it causes this f2 problem. So white needs to come up with a way to fix that f2 problem. And what Tarash is talking about, and I think is actually a really cool idea, is something I guess from a Carlsen game that I didn't know about, but makes a lot of sense. Knight to d2, and then f2 to f4, and then knight to c4. Yeah, I like that. I like this idea a lot. There's also kind of dangerous attacks that can happen if the knight's on c4, like knight b5 threatening to win this d6 pawn. That actually looks really dangerous. But yeah, interesting idea. Hey, welcome back, Electric. But yeah, so knight c4 I think is a good play. Yeah, no. I mean, it makes sense. Getting the F2 to F4 is a big part of the closed Sicilian, so this looks like an efficient way to do that. Hey, thank you very much for the follow, Italian. Appreciate it. So yeah, knight c4, knight e3, and here I think everything's good. The bishop's on g2. What's the bishop doing on g7? This is yeah. So it's an unusual set of moves. I think theoretically, actually, you're bringing up a good point, Electric. This g6 move is a little strange. G6 and e5 don't necessarily go together, right? Because bishop on g7 gets stopped by this e5 pawn, and that's kind of a block. I don't really know. Bishop g7, e5. This gets sort of stuck. To be fair, this diagonal is not that much better for the bishop, so maybe g7 makes sense in the context of, okay, the bishop's not getting out on this diagonal either, so it might as well be on the fianchetto diagonal. But overall, pretty interesting. This g6 looks misplaced, but to be fair, black doesn't really have any better options, so knight e7, knight d2, and then repositioning that knight to c4. Castles, and now, yeah, I would definitely play knight to b5 here. What, I guess d5 is the response, but I would play knight to b5. What does the engine think? Alright, so the engine's still favoring regular development, but the engine does value knight to b5. And then the response here, looks like black's best response, d5, e takes d5, knight takes d5, and then knight to d6. Wow, that's cool. That's a cool opening. This is a really cool idea. Thank you for bringing this up, Tarash. Yeah, that's a reasonable idea. I mean, g6 weakens black's king side, as well as often providing a way of strengthening the bishop on f8 to the fianchetto square. But overall, yeah, I mean, I guess it's just, I can't see any really better idea for black's bishop. Trading off the black bishop on h6 kind of makes sense, because the dark squares are going to be blocked off in this game for probably the rest of it. Yep, makes sense. Yeah, no, I agree with Tarash here for sure. I like it. I think with the pawns liquidating in the center, the bishop gets more and more strong. To me, it doesn't look super obvious how these pawns are going to liquidate, but I guess with f5, yeah, with f5, and then you can sort of move the e5 pawn. Yes. The answer to that is yes. I mean, the g6 hook is a problem for black in many Sicilian openings. Yeah, I would answer yes to that question, Random. I think that I don't know if black is slightly worse, or slightly worse because of it. But creating the hook is always a potential problem for black. But I like this idea a lot. This knight f3, knight d2, knight c4 idea. This is a very creative way to get to this backwards d6 pawn. Interesting. Right. Yep, I think that's right, Tarash. So Tarash is saying, think of it as in English with colors reversed. Yeah, that is basically right. This is this is that English structure that white often gets. Yeah, I mean, I think it's okay. So bishop attacking along this long diagonal. I think you do move king to h8. Yeah, sure, no problem, Julio. One other thing, just to say, Julio, is sure. So I'll move the 10 p.m. or sorry, it's 6 p.m. 6:05 Eastern. But I can move your 6:05 p.m. Eastern game to a 10 a.m. slot. How about I do that? I'll make it so that your games, Julio, are at during the 10 a.m. slot instead of the 6:05 p.m. slot, just for ongoing days. Yeah, we can definitely do that, Julio. I don't know if it matters, but all the games are or all the lectures are available video on demand for 2 weeks. So you definitely don't have to be here. You can always just send the game and we'll look at it, and it can be video on demand. But if you prefer, I can make all of them 10 a.m. Eastern. Cool. Yeah, no, I should check it out, Tarash. That sounds awesome. Any free chess resource, any free chess course or teaching, I think is a great idea, Tarash. So cool. Thank you very much for steering me towards that. Good stuff. Yeah, all the lectures are recorded and up for 2 weeks at least. I'm sort of working on trying to make it so that they're up forever on YouTube. But at this point, every lecture is up 100% for 2 weeks on Twitch. I don't know. That's a complicated question, Random. I'm sure situationally, there's probably ways that they can do it. But yeah. So I'll just make it. You sent 4 games, Julio, and I'll just do them on 4 consecutive days from tomorrow through say Saturday. And they'll all be at the 10 a.m. time slot, Julio. So I'll take any game that I put for yours from a 6:05 p.m. time slot and give it a 10 a.m. slot instead. But yeah, I can do that for sure, Julio. So it'll be like that for the next 4 days. Yeah, no, cool. But yeah, awesome. I'm totally up for all of those free courses, Random. Please keep posting them. If there's other people doing this free lesson model, feel free to post that too. I support anyone who works towards making free chess instruction. Whether that's videos or whether that's live lessons. I really think that is a good thing for the world. So, any way that you can lead us towards more free lessons or more free chess instruction, definitely speak up on that. Because if anyone starts giving free lessons as well, I'm happy to give them a raid or a hosting or whatever. I don't know the terms on Twitch, but if anyone else is giving free lessons, please just tell me, and I'll lead into them on Twitch. I'll give them what I can on Twitch, and start their lecture after mine ends. But yeah. But I'm thinking more of a daily thing. I think that's great, and I think that's definitely a step in the right direction. The chess mods, but free chess lessons are an attainable goal, and hopefully one that will be with us sooner rather than later. But if anyone has a free lesson stream on Twitch, and this is an open offer, please just tell me about it, and we'll lead into it. I mean, realistically, it would be better if they're an expert or better. But consider that an open option, and also the precondition that they have to be appropriate, and not it has to be a G-rated lecture similar to this one, or PG-rated lecture similar to this one. If anyone else has free lectures that they want me to lead into on stream, I will push for that. Yeah, no, I mean, the videos are different. I want live teaching. Teaching should be live, available, and free. And it should be expected to be live, available, and free. So if any other Twitch people, expert or better, with a G-rated stream, want me to lead into them, that's an open offer. Putting that out there now, I will raid them or whatever the term is. But that's the end goal. Chess lessons should be free and available to everyone. There should be no cost associated with chess lessons in my mind, because there doesn't have to be. So if anyone else is doing free chess lessons on Twitch, and they're relatively strong and completely family appropriate, then please tell me about them, and I'll lead into them. Sure. I'm in favor of that. I mean, if he's giving free lectures in this context, please, I know Daniel Naroditsky does it, but he doesn't need that as much. But anyways, just consider chess lessons can and will be free, and hopefully sooner than later. Okay. Anyways, let's get back to this game. It's a really interesting move with knight d2 and knight to c4. And basically here, this is going to work. So f4, rook b8, f4, bishop a8, pawn takes, and now it's an interesting position. I mean, it's double-edged. This rook bishop on a8 is going to be facing in towards this this bishop on g2, and overall, I think White's in pretty good place, even with that attack. This is a connected pass pawn that Black's going to have all sorts of trouble dealing with. Definitely don't move it until later in this game, but this should provide a win for White. E4, c5, knight f3, and knight to d2 to knight to c4. Cool idea out of the closed Sicilian. I'm tempted to try this in my own games, to be honest. Castles, knight d5, pawn takes d5, knight e7. And then now, yeah, there's a lot of good pawn play here. b5, knight e3, bishop b7, c4, a6, b3. Yeah, this is good. Interesting stuff. Yeah, I really like that knight to d2, knight to c4 tactic, threatening that backward black pawn. Very solid. And now, yeah, this looks good. This is a move that I think White can improve on. This d5 pawn is so strong and will be such an asset to Black in the endgame, or sorry, White in the endgame. I would keep this exactly as is. The move that I'd look at is rook a3 defending b3. That's where I would say. But yeah, wouldn't e4 be better, hitting the rook and d3 pawn? Yeah, maybe. But let's just so I'll play back in a second. Thank you very much for joining in, Pravila. Your game, Pravilo, I think is it's tomorrow, right? Or was it yesterday? But in any case, please send games, Pravilo, and we'll look at them. And thank you very much for joining the stream. Queen b6, e5, or d6, queen, knight c8, and here White comes up with a winning tactic. Risky play, but worked out well for White. Good tactic. So I want to just look at d6 for a little bit longer, and then we'll go back. We'll go back in a second. So d6 here, I would leave d6 for the rest of the game. It worked out great for you in this situation, d6, and then the fork on queen d5. So this was exactly what this position needed. So at the end of the day, like, what do I, what am I really, how much is that helping? Bishop takes a8, rook takes a8, queen d5. Awesome. A more accurate response for Black would be after d5 would be either rook f d8, okay, pinning this pawn and threatening to win it. So yeah, so this is the move. So this was an error for Black. d5 or d6 and then knight c8 was a mistake. If Black plays rook to d8, this pawn gets lost. Yeah, right. Yeah, no, I mean, what you did worked perfectly, Tarash. So, what is, nothing, it was a win, and you got the win, and that was the most important thing. But bishop takes a8, queen d5, and this is a big fork. This looks good for, this is good for White. Overall, yeah, but with rook d8, this pawn gets lost. I mean, I guess my sense here is that basically this pawn is a winning pawn. If this position can get neutralized, this pawn should be close to providing a win in the endgame for White. I don't know the route by which White would, trade off all the pieces and all of that, but this connected pass pawn is going to be super powerful. It's going to be well supported by the queen and the rook, and then be able to push to d8. So I think d6 is a little bit premature here. Worked out great, so great. How much it looks good, but there's that's just a win. But rook d8 would have caused White some difficulties. Overall, I think this is another excellent game. So knight c4, really cool idea, novel. Yeah, no, I think you played an excellent game, Tarash. We can slow it down a little bit. This knight d5, I think probably I don't know. I mean, that's. I don't think that this needs to be challenged. Pawn takes d5 keeps, d5, and then pawn takes d5, and then everything's good. I might be tempted to play h4 here. I like h4 actually. I recognize this isn't what the engine is suggesting, but I sort of feel like you can start this attack. I'm also looking at knight to b5. This is pretty interesting. Threats on d6, and then with d5, knight to d6. That looks pretty. So say d5, pawn takes d5, knight takes d5, bn d6. This looks pretty good for white. So in terms of things to improve, I think you came up with this awesome strategy, Tarash. I think this is great. Yeah, no, it's a very dynamic equal position. That's a good assessment. So I would say knight to b. I guess I would say knight to b5 as a general concept before knight to d5. You've done this really cool maneuver that has worked out great. Getting this knight to c4 is really strong, smart idea. But I would lean towards that before I played knight to d5. After h4 well, I mean, yeah, but you incorporated it successfully. It's a really good idea, Tarash, for sure. So anyways, yeah, knight b5 over knight d5, and I think you're good. Knight d5 isn't terrible either. Let's look, h4, h5. Yeah, h5 does stop part of this, but I think h3, g4 exerts pressure, and the black pieces can't super easily get into the king side here. f3, g4, pawn takes h5, and white is good, I think. Black can play h5, but it's always worth keeping in mind that basically any post-castling pawn move weakens the king side. So eventually, black will have to pay for this, and it will be, it will be strong for white eventually. Okay, yeah, no, I mean that makes logical sense, Tarash. But at the same time, I sort of feel like the full power of knight c4 does not get realized if you play knight to d5. I mean, it's still threatening this this d6 backward pawn. But anyways, it's yeah, no, for sure, Tarash. No, it's really interesting. It's really interesting general concepts. Yeah, that's what I would push random. I like that. Especially with h4, h5, now you really can formulate a strong kingside attack. But yeah, even before h4 or before h7, h5, h4, g5 or h4, h5, and I would exert pressure on the king side. Yes, that's a question. Yeah, and of course it's not that simple. But in general, that's where I would push here. I am not that talented, to be honest. I'm not that talented. I wish I was talented, but I'm not a grandmaster. Chess was always something that I did, as a hobby, and I want to do chess as a hobby. It makes me really happy and it's fun for me. But I'm by no means the top level player. I feel like I'm strong enough that I might have the potential to be helpful. But I'm not a grandmaster, it's not my job. It's not something that I'm interested in doing professionally, and I have no interest in doing it professionally. I'm doing this because I believe that the world will be served the best if chess lessons are completely free, and I'm happy to try to help where I can. I'm not super talented. This is hard work and weightlifting. This is me doing a lot of tactics because they were fun for me to do. But I'm not super talented. I wish I was. I'm not. Sam Shankland is super talented. If you were to look at someone who's really, really talented, Sam Shankland is ridiculously talented. Not gonna lie, I know him. So look to him for someone who's really talented. My hope is to just be good instructionally and to help out where I can. Yeah. So Harash sent. Anyways, main point on this game. Super interesting game with knight d2 and knight c4. But really a cool idea. Thank you. I'm not. I'm just not that good, to be honest. You know, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Electric Horse. But it's these things are all relative. There are many better players than me. I have no. I want to. I wish I was better than I am, but I'm not a top level player. But hopefully I can be, you know, a good instructor. Anyways, Aphelion was very nice and was able to set up this chess.com club today. I think it's great. Really nice of him to do. If any of you guys would like to join it, feel free. It's you know, in addition to the Discord, this is another place for us to all you know, contribute to the stream. In the main line, F5 is the move after knight d5. Okay, yeah, let's take a look. I'm surprised that there's mainline theory for this. So knight d5, f5. This refers to a yeah, this refers to, yeah, so in this course, Tarash is referring to a free course, which I assume is a great resource. Thank you for leading me to it, and yeah, I'll take a look. I'm curious. Knight d2, knight c3, knight e5, or sorry, knight f3, knight d2, knight c4 is a great way for yeah, fine with me. Go ahead. If it's free, the answer is if it's completely free, I have no problem with anyone linking chess material. The goal here is free instruction. So if it's completely free, feel free, Tarash. Yeah, so basically here, yeah, so interesting. I'm sure this content is as excellent. This proposed a good idea, but yeah, a4, pawn takes, queen b6. Yeah, and even some of the not so short stuff I've heard on a Chessable is pretty solid. But yeah, so other than that that d6 move, I think this is a pretty good winning endgame for white. So anyways, the main point of this game, Tarash, knight d5 looks a little iffy, but I guess if it's justified by a grandmaster in that course, I'd be willing to defer to that. And then other than that, I really like the knight f3 to knight d2 to knight c4 idea, and overall excellent excellent stuff. Good playing and good yeah, good work. But yeah, d5, you know, the strength of this as a connected pass pawn is worth more than it is after that early d6 push. Anyways, this is a very interesting game. Thank you very much for sending it. And I think let's move on to the next one. Tarash has posted this excellent, you know, has posted this excellent free resource. I'll give it a look myself. I'm, you know, if it's free, it's free, and I'm happy with it. Interesting. Okay, cool. Here's a Mets game. Thank you very much for sending this game, Amet. Let's take a look. It is right here. Okay. d4, e5. All right, England Gambit. I do not know this theory at all. I've seen it played, and it is really interesting. There was a guy in New York City that was playing this in high-level FIDE-rated games at one point. A guy, you know, an expert playing this in FIDE games. Interesting. Cool. Yeah, no, I'll give it a shot, Tarash. Sounds interesting. Okay. Knight c6, knight c3, knight takes e5, knight d5, knight takes, and g takes. Queen d8, bishop f4, d6. Okay. Interesting. This basically has offered white very good free development. This opening, I'm sure, offers practical compensation because a d4 player is not expecting e5 to be played. But at the same time, the open development and the time that it will take black to regain this pawn is really something. Queen to b4, bishop to d2, queen takes b2, knight c3. Okay. Black is... no problem. No, thank you very much, Tarash. Appreciate it. Bishop b4, rook b1, queen a3, and queen to a5. Cool. Interesting. None for tomorrow. The next open slots are there's one for tomorrow at 6:05, and then there's a bunch starting Thursday. So up to you. If you send a game, I'll add it. That's pretty funny, Electric. Yeah, that could happen. Okay, cool. Yeah, sure. We can add it. Thank you very much, Pha, for the follow. Thank you very much for joining the stream. Yeah, that works for me, Tarash. That's fine. Okay, cool. So let's look at this. E4 or D4 E5. I do not know this opening virtually at all. Wish I did. Do not. Let's see. Knight C6 is the main response. Queen E7 is not even in the opening book. Pretty wild, actually. Very interesting. So Knight F3, Knight C6 is the main response here. Queen to B4. Bishop to D2, queen takes, knight C3, bishop to B4, and here, basically things are fine. White has a big advantage. This queen is displaced. White is still technically up a pawn, and okay, cool. Yeah, thanks, Tarash. I will add it for tomorrow at 6:05. That spot was only available because Julio rescheduled his, but I will add it for tomorrow at 6:05 p.m. Eastern. Cool. Interesting. Anyways, basically, what are the advantages for black in playing this? You get a lot of practical compensation, since white, basically, I mean, I don't know it, but I'm willing to take a look at it, Amet. It's a gambit for sure. I've seen experts play it, for what it's worth. So can't be too terrible. I'm trying to think of ways that white doesn't instantly get a great eval. Knight C6 is considered to be black's best response here. I'll just play through the mainline England gambit. This is still not really that great for black, to be I think it's great and it offers a great practical compensation, but let's look at it. Here I think bishop to D6 is an idea. Opening theory says bishop to B4. But really, this isn't that great a position for black in this case. I mean, let's look at a Metz lines, but this is a problem, I think, for black. This pawn is still superior to this pawn. The thing about this England gambit is that white is able to establish E4 before black is able to establish D5. Whoever gets the pawn in the center that's not the D4 or E5 pawn is going to have the standard opposing pawn space advantage. And white secures that pretty clearly. So like knight C6, E4, knight takes E4. And this E4 pawn is stronger than this black pawn, which will end up having to move to either, which will have to either move to D6 or not at all. Black will play for a D5 push potentially, but this pawn opposition is favorable to white. Yeah. So okay. So you don't play that line, Amet. That makes sense. Here, knight C6, threatening the pawn. Bishop to F4, queen B4, bishop D2, queen D2. Overall, here you've traded the B2 pawn for the E7 pawn. No, sorry, it's for tomorrow, Atrash. Everything's full tonight, which is great. Everyone should feel free to send in as many games as they want, and within reason, and Yeah, definitely feel free to send games. We could always use more material. But now we're filled up through tomorrow, or we're filled up through Thursday morning. The next open slots are on Thursday morning. Generally, the longer I have to look at it, the better the analysis is going to be. Don't want to promise that, but like it's usually helpful to get the game ahead of time, like to get to review it a bit more, and sometimes make it with other things. Is it B pawn poisoned? Good question. I think it's not great. Is it? I think position. I don't think there's an immediate positional. So bishop b4, rook b1, queen a3, knight b5, bishop takes, queen takes, queen takes. I don't think black immediately loses material, so I don't think it's poisoned in that sense. I think there are some bad positional there are some bad positional things that black will have to face here, but I don't think it's poisoned in the sense that it's necessarily losing. It's awkward. I mean, this requires king d8, right? But there's no real win here. All right, so there you go. d4, e5, pawn takes, knight f3. It's a trade. I mean, this is I don't know. I guess it's a tough situation in my mind. I mean, I don't know exactly what black can best do to maximize. Yeah. No. What's going on here? In terms of position, we can look at white's missteps, but overall, black is showing, or white is showing a pretty good edge here. A lot of practical compensation and a lot of pressure on the, on the white pieces. Overall, this is, it's definitely a gambit. But just if you take this from a fundamental perspective, you are basically getting a lot of practical compensation for a basically a lot of practical compensation for a slightly worse position. What you've done here is you've gotten gotten basically a slight developmental advantage for white. But the most noticeable thing is that you've traded the e7 pawn for the b2 pawn, and that's generally not a good trade. Even with equal material here, the white has a 2.5 pawn eval edge, mostly related to development and in extra pawns for white in the center. This is interesting. Playing d6 is probably a good idea. Yeah, this game is about practical compensation. Rook b3 was really, d7 saves it, but rook b3 in general was an error. Rook b2 is an error. Rook b2 hangs this knight on c3, so you get the knight and then you're up a piece. So you win. You win up a piece, but I think this opening is fine in the sense that you're playing a practical compensation against a position that is objectively worse. That can be fine. The magnitude of that is relevant. But people do that in many openings. People often play practical compensation against objective compensation. That's basically what this England gambit is doing. It's interesting. I'll look up the guy who used to play this in New York. I think he's dead now, but it was interesting. He came up with some interesting stuff here. Rook b2, bishop takes c3, bishop takes d2. Now black's fine. I mean, the position's basically gone from winning for white to winning for black with that advantage of a piece. In terms of lessons, I think it's worthwhile. I think great game, great that you won. But I would probably steer clear of this just based on the fact that white can get an objective 2-pawn lead out of it. Yeah, Evans Gambit is fine. I actually have an excellent game versus Brandon Jacobson where he played the Evans Gambit against me as an expert. Very interesting game. I'm not sure if there are other people with games of Brandon Jacobson's out of the Evans Gambit, but he definitely has played that over the board USCF. So that might be an interesting person to study in terms of playing the Evans Gambit as white. If he has any games online, those could be interesting ones to learn theory from. In terms of recommending it, I'm not a huge fan of any Gambit, really. I'm just not a Gambit player. But Evans Gambit is one of the more playable ones. In the Evans Gambit, I play bishop to d6, which is very solid. Basically, the most conservative, solid response there. It's playable. Experts play it, masters play it. Definitely some interesting theory there. I wouldn't recommend it because I'm just not a Gambit player. I'm not the person to give that recommendation very comfortably. But overall, I think it can be played at a pretty high level. Anyways, let's just take a little bit of a look at the mainline England Gambit theory. I think definitely worth paying attention. Ahmet got an excellent win here out of practical compensation. So. These types of things absolutely happen. I think within reason. I wouldn't I wouldn't discourage you from using surprise attack lines that offer a lot of practical compensation. But this is a pretty this is objectively not so good for black. But black knows this and is okay with it. So that's the main thinking on this. I was just looking at the main line England Gambit, but it's pretty hard for black to make this extremely playable. Knight to c6, e4, knight takes, knight f3, knight takes f3, queen takes, queen f6, queen d3, bishop b4, c3, and bishop c5. Overall, I think this is pretty good. White is still up a pawn here. But this being the main line in the England Gambit offers practical compensation for sure. This is not something that a d4 player wants to see. And this allows equal material and relatively good development for black. This is the mainline England Gambit, and I think this is probably okay. Not terrible. Still doesn't equalize, but not. Yeah, no, I mean, it's up to you, Random. I mean, they can be a great surprise attack, but overall, I think there's not much in terms of things to advance here. It's just it's not very. In my opinion, it's just not extremely strong. It ends up getting giving up compensation. So d4, e5, pawn takes, and then knight takes, knight c6, e4, knight takes e5 is the main line. Here, knight f3, knight takes, queen f6, queen g3, bishop b4, or even bishop to c5 I think is probably okay. Bishop to b4 is probably better. Forcing white to play c3 and block in the knight is probably a good idea. Bishop c5 here, e5, queen g6. I think the position overall is good for black. Pretty much good for black. This is about as good as black can do out of the England Gambit. The main line involves not queen e7, but the immediate knight c6, and then the main line for white is e4. On knight f3, the black queen then plays to queen c7, and then usually the white backs down with knight to c3, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, queen takes e5. And now I think basically black is good here. This is about as good in terms of this is another mainline England Gambit. Black has a playable position, even if it is a bit positionally behind. Overall, interesting game, Matt. Thank you very much for sending it. Very curious about that, and I appreciate it. Let's look at the next one. Interesting. Yes, which you can do, by the way. Yes, you definitely can do that. So d4, e4 transposes into the Danish Gambit, and that can really be very interesting. Bishop c4, bishop takes b2, bishop takes b2. And overall here, you know, white gets an extremely aggressive position. Evans' gambit is extremely aggressive, but if you happen to know the theory, you can save some time learning. You can save yourself some time learning the England gambit because you can just play this transposition into the Evans' gambit. Very interesting stuff. Cool. So let's do the next one. Yeah, Danish gambit. Yeah, did I say? I think I might have said Evans' gambit. Danish gambit. Awesome. Thank you very much for sending that, Ahmet. Please keep sending them. They're super interesting, and the England Gambit is an idea. Great surprise attack, but objectively, I think it's not to be played every game. Awesome. This game is played by S-Park, and let's see what happens. So here, black plays an unusual opening. The main line here is d5, transposing into the French. Bishop e7 has actually been played here. But anyways, queen e2, d5, e5, c5, queen g4, and here, you know, basically white is okay. White looks like he's got a pretty solid game here. Let's just see what happens. So yeah, bishop e7 against d4. I don't know what white's supposed to do exactly. Queen e2 is an interesting try. I just want to make sure that I'm looking at... So queen e2 is not what was played in the game, but I actually like queen e2 because on d5, pawn can take d5, and then you know, basically this will sort of turn into the French exchange. So d5 is probably the best continuation for white. That's the most popular move. Knight to f3 or knight to c3. Knight to f3. Yeah, overall here, I think white's in a pretty good place. Yeah, this looks like a pretty straightforward win for white, to be honest. I don't know in terms of looking at things. Black plays very unorthodox, unchallenging moves. Here, you know, white gets this huge space advantage. Black doesn't challenge the white center. He can transpose this into... yeah, I would think this would transpose into the French. But black didn't seem to be interested in playing that this game. Black seemed to be interested in playing a game where he gives up basically a big spatial advantage here. E4 and d4 and knight f3, knight c3. White covers the center almost completely. Black is not doing much. Knight to d7. E5 is an idea. Bishop e2 is an idea. Bishop to c4 is interesting. Obviously, this is like a very dynamic position, like Tarash was saying. You know, the engine's bouncing around a lot, super complicated. But black's been very unchallenging to white here. So I think white can just sort of develop normally and get to a better position. I definitely wouldn't have played a3 here. I would have played something like bishop to c4 or bishop to e3, something that develops in a straightforward way. Quick development is almost always a good idea in the opening. Develop quickly and develop to good squares, you know, is a general opening principle. So I would say a3, reminds you of a perk defense. Yeah, there's some truth to that. E5, d5, b4, but white's way up. I mean, you know, this basically is like a perk defense, but you know, here, you know, black doesn't really have much of an opportunity to break anything. C5, you know, is playable, I guess, but overall, I like white's position. You know, this is a big spatial edge. Knight d7. Yeah, it's like this is just a very favorable French. The only c5, this is a French where c5 can never be played as an undermining move. f6 can, but I feel like a move like queen to d3 sort of stops f6 from ever being played as well. Because on f6, queen to g6, and black, you know, loses a lot of safety on the king side. Yeah, so I think really just the moral of the story here is that black played his opening too passively and ended up with a French position where white has you know, all the benefits. White continues on, but positionally speaking, he's already way up. Here he wins a piece. Yeah, good win. Just solid White's position all the way. But I think this demonstrates sort of the extreme of flank openings versus central pawn openings for White versus Black. E6 and D6 together, like the hippopotamus structure, is just not particularly good, and it will let basically, if you aren't challenging your opponent can make developing moves very efficiently. White has a big space advantage and can develop his bishops to c4 and f4 if he wants, or d3 or whatever the most healthy developing squares are for the bishops. Black has just never challenged him. So there's nothing really there for Black to do. He's not threatening anything. Black has made no threats, and as a result, White has been able to develop as safely as he can. This continues on with here I think a3 was not the best use of time. I think just really quick, efficient development is the plan for White. And eventually you'll be able to build up your development so completely that you can launch an attack against an awkwardly placed Black with spatial disadvantages. E5, D5, B4. B4, by the way, I thought was a really good move. B4 actually makes a lot of sense from a positional perspective. You've turned this into a French, and one of the main moves in the French is D5 or is C5. So with B4, you actually completely eliminate Black's ability to play the undermining move C5 in the French. The best move for Black might be A5 here. That is challenging, and that forces B5. But C5 still can't be played unless he plays C5 en passant, pawn takes C6. So overall, yeah, I mean, B5 is B5 is White's best response to A5, and A5 I think is Black's best response to B4. But B4 was really a good idea. It's kind of like if you can see that the pawn structure is transposing to a pawn structure from an opening that you're familiar with, you can try to transpose it in a way that you end up with a familiar position out of the familiar opening. So White basically says, okay, we're playing a French here. What are the main things Black tries to do in the French? And what Black's main ideas in the French are try to undermine the d4 and e5 pawns. So in this place where d4 and e5 are the pawns getting attacked, you can play b4, f6, and basically, here White is, White's in a pretty good place. So after b4, c5 isn't particularly playable, and you're in a good, you're basically in a good place as White. You've stopped one of the main, opportunities for Black in the French. So that was the idea there. E5, D5, B4, Knight D7, and now White's in a pretty good place. By here, White's up by 3 points. But mainly, I think the most valuable thing in this opening is Black didn't challenge until this challenge basically Black didn't challenge at all. I thought Black played D5 first, but I actually see White played E5 first. Now it's a French structure. Now, you can say, all right, I know the point of the French. I know this is a French structure, so I'm going to play B4 and prevent this this strong move that's normally on the Black side for the French, C5. C5 is just never going to be played this game, so B4, takes away a key resource in a relatively familiar-looking opening position, and that ends up playing out well for White. If you have the opportunity to do that, it can be done sometimes with the Caro-Kann, with the French. It's important to recognize familiar pawn structures from openings, because the same, the principles tend, not always true, but the principles tend to revolve around pawn structures. And if you can recognize the pawn structure, you can often come up with fundamentally good moves. This is an example of that. B4 keeps C5 from being played, and you know that's a good, preventing C5 from being played is a good concept from knowing French and French concepts. That's where this is really valuable. Interesting. Opening theory was sort of on my mind today. I always advocate tactics, but I'm also going to advocate the book Ideas Behind the Chess Openings by Fine. That one can really be helpful and give you a good overall sense of themes and openings. I think I'm going to close the stream. for the day or for the morning. But thank you very much for joining, and thank you all very much for participating and for sending your games. I really appreciate it. Thank you. If you have any more games, please send them over. We're booked through the end of tomorrow, but anything you send is going to be good for Thursday. And the earlier I get stuff, I like it. I like it, Aphelion. But the earlier I get stuff, the better and more analysis I tend to be able to do. So yeah, please keep sending games. Thank you all very much for being supportive of the stream, and thank you all for your help. All right, we will consider all of them. We'll consider all of these ideas. But yeah, so yeah, thank you very much. Have a good day, guys. I'll be back at 6:05 p.m. Eastern, and please all have a good day. I'll see you soon. Thanks a lot. Bye.